is the brain behind this globalist government agenda or system rooted in the leftist agenda. Now, the Chinese Communist Party, on the other hand, is especially from the same root of the radical leftist thinking, and that is the evolution of communism, socialism, and the agenda that follows, which created a communist international back in the Soviet Union days, but today, Xi Jinping definitely wants to create that again. And we can definitely see that from this point, Chinese leader Xi Jinping's grand plan to create a so-called community of common destiny, ideologically both are rooted in the globalist vision. One world governance. But aside from creating a global government, what else do they have in common? Well, I think Klaus Schwab is so envious of Xi Jinping's ability to control 1.4 billion people, an entire country using censorship and surveillance, as it is currently in China, where hundreds of millions of cameras watch over people and facial recognition and big data drive their citizen control. Now, recently on World Economic Forum, an opinion article published by this person named Ingo Goldberg, and it basically talks about creating artificial intelligence program that could end up acting as a comprehensive global censorship tool. Now, this is of course a copycat of what the Chinese Communist Party already uses to control its own people. In the article, writer and cybersecurity expert Ingo Goldberg proposes combining the situation where they combine powerful AI network with input from human intelligence data to track and to preemptively stop certain content from circulating online. Now, the article mentions the importance of deciphering the coded language used by child abusers and pornographers to disseminate the so-called content that has to do with cases of sensitive topics or materials. And so by removing these content is the justification for this total surveillance. But along with this, Goldberg also mentions that the AI would be able to be used to detect extremism, disinformation, and hate speech. Now, the way they categorize these three terms, I have no idea how or to what measures. But just from the past years, we've seen exactly what is categorized as hate speech, disinformation, and so on. Now, Goldberg says the proposed AI program would be supplemented by, quote, off-platform human intelligence gathering. To what extent does this proposal actually help to eliminate child pornography or so on is still to be determined. But the idea that now you're going to surrender self-freedom and the ideas of personal liberty to the global control just for the sake of controlling child pornography, is that the total justification? Not so sure. Now, what I do know is that after the studying of the entire communist system, which is built on controlling the world, it seems that to create a global government and global control, there needs to be an immediate control and the surrender of freedom from the people. That's often the key word, right? Surrender more to the global machine. Now, the World Economic Forum regularly invites Chinese speakers to talk about joining the global vision, and one of them recently is Ma Jun, who is a CCP banking official, who calls for mobilizing private capital to, quote-unquote, avoid funding activities that damage nature, meaning that if those things don't meet the environmental standards, well, they're not going to get the funding. Now, this is coming from a Chinese official. That means those who don't comply with the globalist agenda, rooted in the green policies, shouldn't be allowed to do business around the world. And at the World Economic Forum annual summit in March, the head of the Alibaba Group talked about a system that will monitor people's individual carbon footprints. They calculate and analyze them based on their eating habits, traveling habits, and other behaviors. Now, this is all fitting into the global agenda that is the green policy, or the so-called transformation of energy. And we see another parallel here. The so-called ESG score, the environmental, social, and corporate governance score, is essentially the perfect climate tool to control large corporations and individuals, right? And that's what's being implemented in the West. Meanwhile, the irony is that asking members of the Chinese Communist Party to speak on this issue, that is climate change, the CCP is the top polluter in the world. Of course, they're adding more coal-fired plants as we speak, and they're promising over and over again that they're going to be carbon neutral by 2030 or 2050, while they're being allowed by all governments around the world to continue with the path as the current #1 in carbon emission. Perhaps inviting them to speak at the World Economic Forum is a little ironic. Or perhaps Klaus Schwab's favorite speaker from the entirety of the event has to be Xi Jinping himself, who he invited to speak in January of this year. Now, since the early days of Xi Jinping, he has been talking about the so-called community of common destiny, or a community of shared future mankind, and the idea is that everyone in the world should share the same values or the same set of standards, as we call it, and that's going to, of course, be dominated by the Chinese Communist Party themselves and the teachings of Marxism. And in other words, it's going to be the global set of values that are favorable and are dictated by the leftists and as well as the communists. And they would be set out to be an ideological and spiritual agenda for the entire world to see and to abide by. And that's essentially the key of a global government, right? To control people and to control them politically, ideologically, and spiritually. Now, Xi gave this speech in January, and this was at the Davos agenda, and he says, quote, "The world today is undergoing major changes unseen in a century. Now, these changes, not limited to a particular moment, event, country, or region, represent the profound and sweeping changes of our times. As changes of the times combine with the once-in-a-century pandemic, the world finds itself in a new period of turbulence and transformation. How to beat the pandemic and how to build the post-COVID world, these are major issues of common concern to people around the world. There are also major urgent questions we must give answers to." End quote. Listening to that, now, this so-called unseen change in a century, the pandemic, and how he later in the same speech asked for closer global cooperation, is the fact that Xi wants to create and shape an environment in which globalism is the dominant force. But here's the catch. Xi's ambition is beyond that. He knows that to ally with the globalist and the leftist, there is eventually bound to be a point where the two sides will be in disagreement over something, right? Climate change, maybe. The military, maybe. At that point, he needs to know if the leftist, the World Economic Forum, will abide by the communist natures rather than the leftist agenda, even though they come from the same root. This is why Xi has been advocating for this so-called community for a shared future of mankind. Now, the World Economic Forum to Xi Jinping is just a part of helping him to achieve a global domination and the global control of this communist international of the 21st century. And the communists know that they can't outright push pure communism into the West today, so by doing it through the World Economic Forum, they've essentially undermined and destroyed the social fabric of the entire Western civilization under the disguise of climate change and world economy. And that's, I think, where when we're discussing the evil nature of communism, we often neglect a point about the spiritual control of the people in China. So when you join or you're selected for the Young Pioneer, which is the elementary level communist organization in every single school, or then you join the Youth League, which is essentially the high school version of that, and you will be swearing allegiance to the communist flag and to the Communist Party leaders, and in doing so, it almost feels like you have been spiritually possessed by the demon that is communism. And now, you are spiritually aligned with the teachings of communism and the teachings of Marxism, which is, by the way, also rooted in the murders of hundreds of millions of people around the world and its history. Now think about what the World Economic Forum and the globalist agenda pushes for. They are pushing for a spiritually aligned version, or the so-called leftist version, of climate change, of global peace, or globalizing economy, and all of these terms. And that is also spiritually done. So the ideas of global peace through the transformation of the climate agenda, or the artificial intelligence, or the global control, is rather the same. And we're really talking about what communism does to people. It's not about the political control, it's not about the humanism, or it's not even about the technology that they've stolen from us. It's actually about how they change you spiritually. Whether that's the communist official atheist beliefs, or the ideas of anti-religion, or the ideas of destroying culture, all of these associate with spirits. And your spirit is what gets destroyed in the process of being converted into a communist. Now, in essence, both the CCP and the WEF, they have a spiritual component that we don't often talk about. That it's beyond ideology. It's even before they try to preach you their ideologies to the point of a political agenda. Without the spiritual guidance behind it, there's no better way to think of it as something other than a religious-like purpose. That is, you have to believe in their purpose first, right? The CCP wouldn't be at this level of controlling China or for people to actually want to appease them if they didn't have a spiritual offer to them. Now, of course, we understand this version of utopia to the communist is the fact that everything and everyone will be happy with not owning anything, right? Klaus Schwab talks about that. Well, as far as people go, in this world, individuality is actually rooted in a higher purpose, in that people believe in something bigger than governments, something bigger than their political ideology, and something more spiritual. By destroying this purpose, you've actually destroyed the need to survive and the need to live. People die protecting and preserving freedom around the world. In the United States, it's a huge value and a huge component of what made this constitutional republic so powerful. And the Chinese Communist Party knows that to maximize the ambition through the so-called spiritual possession of communism, they take over the world not through violence and not through subversion or infiltration. They do so through the ideas of letting you believe in communism. So through the spiritual possession of communism, they take over the world, right, through violence, subversion, and infiltration. And I don't think we talk too much about this in terms of the infiltration of communism in America today, because it's already happening here through the ideas of socialism and woke ideologies. Many people question today that the Chinese Communist Party or the government isn't really the textbook definition of communism. It's more like a version of state capitalism, or for the Marxist ideas mixed with capitalism and so forth. But in China, you actually have a Bible study class-like version, but for communism. And so all the communist leaders are everywhere, right? Like Lenin, Stalin. If there's no need for the system to exist, why worship these people like gods, like deities? They don't really want to rule by communism. They actually want to rule by the destruction of the faith, destruction of spirituality. In itself is a religious-like system where you have followers of communism doing the biddings, like the acolytes of communism, and we're talking about the Chinese military, we're talking about the People's Liberation Army, and we're talking about the politicians talking, right? We're even talking about the leader himself, Xi Jinping. So we're talking about all of these people who actually are doing the bidding for the specter of communism. And here's where I think the effects of the Chinese Communist Party has actually influenced that of the World Economic Forum, not just in the surveillance and censorship level, but to the level of spirituality. And that's why we see the World Economic Forum pushing all these ideas that are rooted very much into people's brains, like we need climate change, we need to have a globalizing economy, the world needs to be saved, otherwise we are doomed. Now, when they invite Xi Jinping to speak, it just shows that they're adopting the ideologies without the name communism, but in essence, everything's the same. The global censorship and the need for artificial intelligence, right? All of these things are just the ideas of association of controlling freedom, controlling the conservative values, and often, likely, and very much condemned and demonized around the world is the values of the freedom and religious and conservative values. The World Economic Forum, I remember Thomas Sowell had this great quote. I think it was along the lines of, anything today that's been considered vogue, right, has been tried before in history, and it's proven to be disastrous and has failed time and time again. Yet people come back to this stuff. It really has just been the formula of failure in communism in the East and in the West. Yet the ideas now manifesting as the radical left or the communist or socialist ideas in the West, they're actually taking and gaining footsteps again. All the while, this is the Chinese Communist Party. West-Taiwan relationship.
Well, I think the U.S.-Taiwan relationship is strong, and I went over there not too long ago as well with a group of senators led by Senator Lindsey Graham, and so I know firsthand kind of what they're dealing with over there. I think that we really need to support Taiwan, and I'm glad that Speaker Pelosi went over there. I'm glad she didn't back down whenever our government, unfortunately our Pentagon and our White House asked her not to go and encouraged her not to go. They were being pressured by the Chinese, which doesn't speak well about the relationship that our government, that our White House has with the Chinese government. They seem to be, they seem to be controlled to some extent by the Chinese, which scares me as an American citizen. But she went over there. She said she was going. She did it. I think it was the right thing to do. I think that we're in trouble in that part of the world right now because the Chinese see the Biden administration as a window of opportunity, and they think that they have to act, and they have to act quickly before Biden's not president anymore, because they really they believe that they can manipulate him, they can manipulate his administration, and they truly believe, based on what's already happened in Afghanistan and in Ukraine and so on and so forth, that they can do something, that they can be aggressive towards Taiwan in ways that they haven't been able to do before and get away with it as long as Biden is our president. So I think that it's unfortunate, but he's seen as an opportunity.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I mean, I wish I supported her going to Taiwan. I'm okay with that. We've been doing that for years, members of Congress going. We view Taiwan as a strategic ally, not an ally formally, but a strategic friend.
Yes.
They're important in the region. They're a great trading partner with us. In my home state of Arizona, we have a great trading program with them. They train some of their fighter pilots in Arizona, in my state. So I support that. But I thought the way that Pelosi did it was kind of awkward. I thought the way that the White House did it was kind of awkward, But I'm not surprised that they would sanction her, because when I've said stuff about China on the floor of the House or on TV or something that they didn't really like, I've heard from them in a nastygram. They'll send me a little letter telling me, they didn't appreciate it or whatever. So not a big surprise, I don't think.
So that's interesting, because I actually know the Chinese embassy or whatnot, when they want to pressure people, they will say, hey, don't have this event, or we're going to stop funding you or whatnot. But does that work for Congress members, where they send you a letter, and how does that make you feel?
Well, I get a charge out of it. It's kind of fun, and so I think we saved those in a file folder somewhere. And my first thought is always, I just don't think they understand how a free constitutional republic works. That people get to say what they think, including if you have a heterodox view of your own government, And I think they want to control it. And I want to say to them, hey, you're in America, and in America, it's everybody gets to have an opinion. Everybody does have an opinion, and we get to express it. This isn't China, where you can tell me to shut my mouth, but that's just the way it is.
And in terms of the foreign policy when it comes to dealing with China, how does that rank for the Republican agenda going forward versus things like inflation or the economy?
Well, China is no longer simply an economic competitor. It is an actual geopolitical adversary, and we have to recognize that. So we need to make sure that we stop their theft of our intellectual property. We need to make sure that we're not transferring information and data and that they want, that they can't get anywhere else. I think you're going to have to, until we bring this under control, you're going to have to say, we're not going to allow you to have your students come here and learn at our universities and go back and basically having spied on us and having obtained information from us, go back. I think you're going to have to look at punishing them economically for intellectual property theft. We have to start taking this seriously, and I think many, if not all of my Republican colleagues, kind of feel the same way, that they view China as a geopolitical threat. It's our number one adversary in the world right now. So we have to take action.
Now, before we move on to the domestic agendas, the U.S.-Taiwan relationship, as you mentioned, is important. But how would Republicans go about strengthening that?
Well, I think we make sure that we can provide a lot of the material that they need militarily to defend themselves. When I talk to government leaders from Taiwan, they don't want us necessarily to be over there intervening. They're willing and believe that they can defend themselves, but we just need to sell them the material. I think that's important. I also think that we need to strategically help them as they are expanding their factories into the U.S. for chip manufacturing, etc. We import so many chips from both mainland China and from Taiwan. If anything happens, then the U.S. can't help anybody in the world, because we're going to be frozen out because we don't have our own capacity and capability.
Well, we need to stand with our allies. The Taiwanese have been an ally for decades and decades, and we can never ever allow the Communist Party of China to dictate when we can go visit our allies. they absolutely have the right and the duty to go see our allies, Taiwan. I don't say a whole lot good about Miss Pelosi, but I can tell you I agreed with her when she said, we're going. We're not allowing China to dictate to us. And so I appreciate it. I wish she had conversations with the leadership of the Republican conference and also of the Republican minority in the Senate as well as the House, so that we had more communications there. And she was remiss in that regard. We need to all be on the same page and speaking with one voice, but we can never allow the Communist Party of China to dictate to the United States of America, the most powerful and freedom-loving country on the face of this planet, to tell us when we can go visit our allies. We're not going to do that. And I think that the Republicans need to always stand strong in that regard.
China actually put out a list of 8 things that are going to suspend for U.S.-China cooperation. Among one of them is climate change talks. Do you think this is going to push the Biden administration to cave in to China?
The Biden administration has no spine. Look at their record. In fact, they sanctioned Pelosi. What else is new? I mean, imagine a country saying that another country's representative in Miss Pelosi can't travel anywhere in the world without threats of being shot down. This is how far it's gone. This would have never happened under the Trump administration. The only thing China understands is power, leverage. They see us as a weakened country now. And I will give Ms. Pelosi credit. She went on and went. Being sanctioned, that's not news. I mean, we would have thought that. But we ought to come back stronger now and reply to them in pretty strong fashion. But will this administration have any umph or have any real consequences? I don't think so. They haven't in the past.
What's the Republican China agenda for going forward if you take back the House?
We've got to rein in China. Look at the land that they're purchasing all over America. Look at the influence that they're having in not a good way. And so we've got to confront China for what it is. We got to do it now. We can't wait. China is a trading partner with us, as you know. When President Trump put tariffs on, he had the upper hand with them. They need America really more than we need China, provided we can get independent on our manufacturing, not be reliant on them for anything, mainly the products that they produce. Look at what they're doing to the Uyghurs in China. It's an atrocity on how they treat their people, and for what's going on now, it's an atrocity to give them any more leverage, and we've got to be independent, and I think we'll do that.
And so talk a little bit more about the infiltration of the Chinese Communist Party here in the United States. This farmland situation where they're buying up very strategic acres of lands around key military installations in the United States. What is the solution or the Republican agenda for fighting against that?
Well, the solution now, I mean, first thing we've got to do is publicize it. I've got to go to the 5th District in South Carolina and publicize what they've done there and emphasize what they're doing in Oklahoma, what they're doing in Texas, what they're doing all over. And you hit it on the head, strategic. Why are they going toward our military reserves? Now, the other thing we've got to do is pretty much handcuff them with regulations on what they can and can't do. We can't have a situation where they're putting up drones and inspecting every military base that we have. And so that's the first step. The land's been deeded. We got to see what we can do to stop any further development, I guess is the best word that I would use. And it's a challenge. I mean, it's not where was the mainstream media when they were buying all this up? Now, I realize they're doing it through third parties in a lot of cases, but we can't allow it. We got to publicize it, and then we got to take action to do what we can while we can.
Now, there has been many bills introduced by especially Republican Congress members. Congressman Chip Roy had one. Congresswoman Elise Stefanik also had similar bills to try to restrict them. But right now, of course, without the majority in the House, it's very hard. So what exactly would be the key to limiting the Chinese influence in the United States when it comes to farmlands or everything else?
It's a challenge because this administration is in bed with China. Look at the connection as an example, the strategic oil reserves. Depleting that was meant for America, not for China and the other countries that they're giving oil away to or supposedly selling. So, you know, our task is to keep writing letters to the administration, keep putting the bills up. I know they're not going to act on them. This administration's under Pelosi and under Biden, but what's the option? Not do anything? You keep doing it. You keep making America aware of it. And the alarm bells have gone off, particularly with the states that are under siege, Montana, Oklahoma, Texas. It's serious when they're going to buy strategic pieces of property where our military bases are. We've got to handcuff them on what they can do with it. And if we can put a man on the moon, we can survey and put surveillance in place to stop them from doing what they're doing.
Congressman Ralph Norman, it's a pleasure to have you on.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you so much for watching tonight. This is China.